The lights flicker. Not a gentle dimming, but a violent, synchronized collapse as the digital heartbeat of the East Coast ceases to beat. In the span of a single afternoon, the largest pipeline operator in the United States, Colonial Pipeline, goes dark. Thousands of miles of steel veins, responsible for moving nearly half the fuel consumed by the entire eastern seaboard, are sealed shut. Airports scramble for fuel, hospitals switch to emergency generators, and a panic that feels distinctly like a war zone sweeps through the suburbs. Gas pumps remain empty for days. Prices spike to astronomical levels. The nation holds its breath, waiting for the lights to come back on, unaware that the enemy isn't a foreign army, nor a domestic terrorist cell in the traditional sense. The enemy is a ghost. A faceless collective of hackers hiding behind encrypted channels and pseudonyms, operating from the shadows of the internet, demanding a ransom in the only currency they understand, Bitcoin. They call themselves DarkSide. And they have just proven that in the digital age, a single line of malicious code is more powerful than 1,000 tanks. To understand the magnitude of this event, we must rewind to the world of early 2021. The global landscape was already fractured by a pandemic that had upended economies and lives. But beneath the surface of daily struggle, a new, terrifying frontier was expanding. The cryptocurrency market was in the throes of a euphoric bull run, with Bitcoin and other digital assets reaching record highs. This was the golden age of the decentralized dream, but it was also the breeding ground for a new kind of organized crime. The traditional boundaries of law enforcement were blurring. Criminal syndicates were no longer bound by geography. They were migrating to the dark web, forming loose but deadly coalitions that operated with the efficiency of multinational corporations but the ruthlessness of street gangs. Among these emerging threats, one group began to distinguish itself not just by the volume of their thefts, but by their audacity and their willingness to weaponize the global infrastructure. DarkSide was not a monolithic entity in the way the FBI or a traditional cartel might be. It was a syndicate, a loosely affiliated network of Russian-speaking cybercriminals who had evolved beyond simple theft. They were a ransomware-as-a-service operation. This is a crucial distinction. In the old days, a hacker would write a virus, steal a credit card number, and cash out. DarkSide changed the game. They built the tools, they maintained the infrastructure, and they sold access to these tools to affiliates. These affiliates were the foot soldiers, the ones who would infiltrate a target, deploy the ransomware, and hold the system hostage. In return, the affiliate split the profits with the DarkSide developers. It was a symbiotic relationship of crime, a division of labor that allowed the group to scale their operations at a terrifying speed. They weren't just stealing, they were selling the keys to the kingdom to anyone willing to pay the price of admission. The target was Colonial Pipeline. In the real world, they were a critical piece of American infrastructure, a massive network of pipelines stretching from Houston to New York, moving refined gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. They were the lifeblood of the East Coast. In the digital world, however, they were just another corporation with a network to secure. On the evening of May 7, 2021, the attack began. It didn't start with a massive explosion or a hail of bullets. It started with a phishing email. A single employee, perhaps tired, perhaps careless, clicked a link that looked legitimate. That click opened a door that was already unlocked, a vulnerability that the attackers had been scanning for. DarkSide, or more accurately, one of their affiliates, had found a weak point in the company's remote access network. They didn't need to break down the front door, they simply used a spare key that had been left in the lock. Once inside, the attackers moved with surgical precision. They didn't touch the operational technology that controlled the flow of fuel in the pipelines. Instead, they targeted the corporate network, the IT systems that managed the billing, the scheduling, and the communication. Within hours, the network was locked. Every file, every database, every email server was encrypted. The screen of every computer in the Colonial Pipeline offices turned into a skull and crossbones, accompanied by a chilling message: the data is gone unless you pay. The attackers demanded $4.4 million in Bitcoin. The message was clear: pay up, or the lights go out forever. The company, paralyzed by the threat and the uncertainty of the situation, made a decision that would haunt them for years. They paid. But how did they do it? How did a group of hackers manage to shut down an entire energy grid with a few lines of code? The answer lies in the architecture of modern ransomware, specifically the variant used by DarkSide, known as the DarkSide ransomware or RYUK in some of their earlier iterations. The technical process is a dance of deception and automation. First, the attackers establish a foothold, usually through a compromised credential or a phishing exploit. Once inside, they move laterally. They use tools like Mimikatz to steal credentials from the memory of the servers, allowing them to hop from one machine to the next, escalating their privileges until they have administrative control over the entire network. This is the Walking Dead phase of the attack, where the hackers are invisible, moving through the digital corridors of the company undetected. Once they have full control, the encryption engine is deployed. This is the moment of no return. The ransomware scans the network for valuable data, identifies it, and then encrypts it using military-grade encryption algorithms. The original files are scrambled into an unreadable mess, and a new file extension is appended to them. The attackers then leave a ransom note, often a text file named readme.txt, demanding payment. But the brilliance of the DarkSide operation was the ransomware-as-a-service model. The affiliate who executed the attack didn't need to know the technical details of the encryption. They just needed to know how to deploy the tool. The DarkSide developers had already done the hard work of creating a bulletproof, undetectable encryption algorithm that could lock a network in minutes. The affiliate's role was simply to find the target, deploy the tool, and wait for the money to hit the wallet. It was a business model perfected for the digital age, turning cybercrime into a scalable, low-risk, high-reward enterprise. The impact of the Colonial Pipeline attack was immediate and catastrophic. The moment the attack was confirmed, Colonial Pipeline took the unprecedented step of shutting down the pipeline. It was a precautionary measure, a fear of the unknown, but the result was the same: a total halt in the flow of fuel. The ripple effects were felt almost instantly. Gas stations across the East Coast began to run dry. Panic buying ensued as consumers rushed to fill their tanks, driving prices up by hundreds of dollars. Airports were grounded, hospitals were forced to rely on backup generators, and the economy of the entire region ground to a halt. The FBI was brought in immediately, launching a massive investigation. But the trail was cold. The money had been sent to a cryptocurrency address, and the digital footprint was designed to be as invisible as possible. The attackers had used a mix of tumbling services and exchanges to try to wash the money, but the blockchain is a ledger that never forgets. The aftermath was a chaotic mix of corporate crisis and government intervention. Colonial Pipeline, under immense pressure from the White House and the public, paid the $4.4 million ransom. It was a decision that would later be heavily criticized by security experts and government officials, who argued that paying the ransom only fuels the cycle of crime. However, the company felt they had no other choice. The lights were going out, and the cost of not paying was too high. But the story didn't end there. In a stunning turn of events, the FBI, working with international partners, was able to trace the Bitcoin transaction. They had identified the specific wallet address used by the attackers and, through a combination of blockchain analysis and intelligence gathering, they located the funds. In a daring operation, the FBI managed to intercept the Bitcoin before it could be fully laundered. They recovered $2.3 million of the $4.4 million, returning it to the company. The attackers had lost more than half their loot, but the damage was done. The world had seen what was possible. The fear had been planted. The arrests that followed were a mix of triumph and frustration. Several members of the DarkSide syndicate were identified, and some were arrested in Eastern Europe. However, the masterminds remained at large, or at least, the ones who held the keys to the kingdom were never brought to justice in a courtroom. The group continued to operate, shifting their tactics and their targets. The DarkSide attack served as a wake-up call for the entire world of cybersecurity. It proved that critical infrastructure was no longer safe. It showed that the line between the physical and digital worlds was porous, and that a cyber attack could cause physical damage and economic collapse just as effectively as a bomb. The lesson for the global community was stark: no system is immune, and the cost of security is not just financial, but existential. What does this mean for the future of our digital existence? The DarkSide attack is a case study in the evolution of cyber warfare. It highlighted the dangers of the ransomware as a service model, which has since spawned countless clones and variations. It showed that the weakest link in any security chain is often human, not technological. No matter how advanced your firewalls are, if an employee clicks a phishing link, the castle is open. It also underscored the unique challenges of law enforcement in the age of cryptocurrency. While the FBI was able to recover some of the funds, the anonymity of the blockchain remains a formidable shield for criminals. The attack forced governments and corporations to rethink their entire approach to cybersecurity, moving from a reactive stance to a proactive, defense-in-depth strategy. But as we look at the current landscape, with billions of dollars in ransomware payments made every year, it is clear that the battle is far from over. The ghosts of DarkSide are still out there, watching, waiting, and evolving. The story of DarkSide is not just a tale of a hack, it is a warning. It is a reminder that in our hyper-connected world, the most dangerous threats are often the ones we cannot see. As we move forward, the question is not if another attack will happen, but when, and who will be the next target. The tools are out there, the methods are known, and the motivation is always there. We are living in a new era of conflict, one fought not with guns and tanks, but with code and encryption. And until we can close the gap between our digital defenses and the ingenuity of the criminals, the lights will always be at risk of flickering out. But the story of DarkSide is just one chapter in the vast, dark library of crypto crime. If you think the shutdown of an entire pipeline was terrifying, imagine the scale of a financial collapse orchestrated by a single, anonymous individual. Imagine a world where the value of your money could vanish in a heartbeat, not through theft, but through a flaw in the code itself. There is another group, another operation, that is even more dangerous, one that has already changed the global financial landscape forever. We will uncover their identity, their methods, and the shocking truth behind their disappearance in our next episode. Stay tuned, because the next mystery is darker than you can imagine.